to the families and the victims affected by this tragedy, and we continue to be available for your support. With that, I'll turn things back over to Mandy, and she'll kind of go through a timeline of what happened on that day.
On Sunday, November the 5th, 2017, approximately 11:36 in the morning, Conley Memorial received notification through our EMS dispatch that there was an active shooter call at First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs. In less than 10 minutes after the call, we activated our emergency response plan and called MedCom to notify them that we were potentially going to be transferring out multiple trauma patients. Administration, additional staff, and surgical-based physicians were notified. Security was called in, and our local Floresville Police Department came and manned our hospital on lockdown precautions. Blood Bank was also notified for additional blood and resources. At approximately 12:25, our first patient was received at Conley Memorial Medical Center. MedCom auto-accepted and approved all transfers for incoming trauma patients. 45 minutes later, the last patient of 8 was received at the Conley Memorial ER. Within an hour of receiving our first patient, that patient was transferred to University Hospital in critical but stable condition. By 13:50, our last patient was transferred to University Hospital. That was a total of 4 transferred to University. The 3 remaining were in stable condition. By 15:10, the final patient to be treated was discharged and released. 1 patient still receiving care at Conley Memorial Medical Center is in stable condition.
Okay, and with that, I think we'll open it up for questions if anyone has it. For anyone on the panel?
So the emergency
Please go ahead.
room has a 10-bed, it's 10 beds. So were you able to accommodate these people coming in? Was it easy accommodation for them?
So the question is how many beds does the emergency center have, and were we able to easily accommodate the number of patients we saw with those beds? And so yes, we have 10 beds, that's correct, and yes, I think we were able to successfully accommodate that amount of patients fairly easily, and the staff did a wonderful job with that. Other questions?
Can you describe the wounds that the one patient that you have saw? Like what kind of wounds, injuries is it saying?
So the question was, what kind of wounds and injuries did we see in these patients? Briefly and kind of broadly, because we can't describe specifically on the patients, but we had multiple gunshot wounds to these patients, extremity and some abdominal, and that's all I can really say in terms of being specific about what we saw for these patients.
What made the determination to transfer the 4 patients that were transported to University Hospital?
So the question is about what was the determination for transferring 4 patients. So in general, our hospital is what's considered a level 4 trauma center, so we are to stabilize and send along the vast majority of our patients because of our resource level. So these patients were obviously ones that would outstrip our resource level, and so they were identified as patients that needed to be transferred almost upon arrival.
Can you talk about?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, could you talk about the event itself? I mean, in terms of getting the call and mobilizing all of your staff. I'm assuming you do have training for this in terms of drills because it's just the times that we live in. But you know, everyone has to go through the question in their head: who would have thought it would happen here? You know, what was that feeling like knowing that this was a real-world situation for you?
Absolutely. So I'll start, and maybe Mandy can chime in a little on this. So you're asking about what the situation in general was like for the staff and the notification process and how things going and training. So emergency room staff are all trained in trauma procedures, and as required by that, there is some mass casualty training that occurs for all staff who work in emergency departments who are in level 4 trauma centers or different trauma center designations. So we have all had that training for preparation. Obviously, these things don't occur in any small town on a regular basis, so it's not something that there's a lot of real-world experience with, but the staff is well trained. Upon receiving notification, there was a nervous staff, of course, but they all responded professionally and were quickly in the mode of getting ready to receive patients and take care of them. And I think Manny could talk a little bit about how they were notified and those procedures there.
Absolutely. So as soon as we received word that there was a shooting, we started calling in additional staff members, registered nurses to come in and help us mass triage patients. All of the nurses are trauma nurse certified, so they are trained and educated to know how to identify these injuries and help assist the physician in getting them stabilized. We had probably about additional 6 nurses that came in, and then ancillary staff who came in to help us stabilize these patients. And they all worked very well together as a team to get them stable.
And I will say that even staff that weren't called in from the community, primary care physicians and folks like that, as soon as they heard, they came and arrived at the doorstep and offered help wherever it was needed. Yes, sir.
Comment on the demeanor of the patients.
So I can comment in general about the demeanor of the patients. I mean, any trauma patient is going to be in psychologic shock in addition to whatever physiologic issues they're having. And so they were calm, actually, all the patients. They were a little scared, as you would expect, but they were all excellent. I mean, they were all very cooperative and amazingly brave, considering the situation they've been in. But to a person, they were all exactly like that.
Can you just tell
sir.
us if any of your staff, this being a small town, actually knew some of the victims?
So
Yeah,
I'll
so
let Dr.
I
Watts
actually
get to
live
that.
here in this community. My wife was born and raised here, and that's what brought us back down here in the first place. And many of these patients are both our patients selectively and our practices outside of the emergency department, as well as friends and friends of family within the community.
And emotionally, what's that like?
It's very difficult. Yes, sir.
Sir.
Can you talk about the age ranges of these patients?
So the age range, I believe we have as 7 to 73. So obviously this was a very wide-ranging population, and that's kind of to be expected if you're having an event like this occurring at a church.
Did you treat a pediatric patient here?
We did have patients ranging in pediatric age, yes.
How did they do? I guess, generally speaking.
Generally speaking, the patients were stable when they left this area. I can't speak to their current condition in San Antonio, obviously.
But I mean, like demeanor. I mean, obviously, a kid is going to be different.
Excellent. As I said, to a patient, including those younger patients, very brave, very cooperative, scared, but did very well. Amazing.
What are the difficulties of treating someone as young as 7 and someone as old as, in their 70s?
So in general, when we get trauma training actually includes specialized training in those who are younger and those who are older. And it has to do with physiology, and it has to do with what medications older patients might be on that can affect their physiology. There's not a lot of training in the psychology of what's going on because in general you're so focused on normalizing that patient's physiology to stabilize the patient and get them where they need to go. For the most part, most of us have seen this when we do this for a living in terms of traumatic patients, and so we're fairly skilled at being able to be professional and deal with just the physiologic issues at that time. And that's what we did, and so people did excellent with all the age ranges. Sir.
Can you comment on the recovery? Will the patients go back to normal, or are they going to have these for the rest of their lives?
So I can comment a little bit on the recovery from the anatomic wounds themselves. I mean, patients, depending on what the wounds are, that will predict the recovery. So it's impossible to say on a generalized basis. Depending on what they have, that will tell how they do from the standpoint of their anatomy and the physiology. From a psychologic standpoint, none of us up here obviously are counselors of that sort, but in general, the wounds that stick with trauma patients the longest are the psychologic wounds, and I'm sure like the town and everything else, folks will have to deal with that for some time now.
Do you feel like they might be in crutches, or can you comment?
I can't comment specifically. It's so difficult to tell. I mean, things can change in these patients from a minute-to-minute basis. So people who seemed really sick can do exceptionally well, and people who don't seem so sick can obviously get much sicker on a very quick time frame. So it would be incorrect for me to tell you exactly what they might end up like. Ma'am.
What was the process like in terms of alerting family members and managing the family members of the victims? Did you guys alert them, or do you guys have kind of an outpouring of family members just asking for answers from you guys?
So in the immediate time from the incident itself, there's not a concerted effort, at least from the physician and those taking care of the patients, to look and get into the family members. We're so busy concentrating on stabilizing that patient, we just didn't get there. So I can't speak to what's gone on past that time frame in terms of notifying the family. I know there are community members and other individuals that helped out with that process, because there were certainly many, many calls. But there are folks that handle that. It just wasn't us that was handling that part of the problem. You're welcome. Other questions?
Have you seen these
Sir.
injuries before with children, or is this the first time for you?
Yes, I've seen these injuries many times before. I think Dr. Moorhead has seen them many times before as well.
Unfortunately, yes.
It's pretty standard for our type of training to see lots of that in training alone. So absolutely. Yes.
How do you think the staff is affected by this going forward? I mean, this is sort of like a defining moment perhaps in one's career, especially in a community like this, a hospital of this size.
Right.
What's different as a hospital from here on in? Because, when we deal with emergency situations, we learn from that and we adapt how we respond to emergencies based on what we've learned from. So.
Right. So I think I'll let Mandy answer that, but the question is how will the staff respond to this going forward?
Professionally and emotionally.
Absolutely. Professionally and emotionally. So, please.
Absolutely. One great thing is we have had an outpouring of concern and generosity from pastors and counselors here in the community. Almost immediately, pastors and counselors were up here helping not only the patients but the staff deal with the things that were going on and their emotions. And we've probably had about 3 or 4 debriefings and counselings already, an open chapel for the staff to go and just talk to pastors about their feelings and together as a team to help them get through it with each other. A good thing about being in a small town is we're all family. So we work together as a team and we work together as family and support each other. So if one is having a troubled day or a troubled time, we're all going to be there for that staff member. And that's what helps us get through each day.
Anything to add to that?
I would just say that, as you would expect in situations like this draws us all together even closer. As Mandy mentioned, we all sort of act as a family, and many of us are family. But it just keeps us closer together, and we work even better with each other.
Absolutely. Other questions? Is that it? Okay. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.